So this is the episode I've been waiting for 6 seasons. I have this strange fascination for Canada. It feels like Canada is calling out to me, and this is my response.
This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Welcome to the podcast. You've been waiting for this for upwards of a year. This is the most important episode, I think, for you.
I know, and I can't even figure out why. I mean, I wrote that I wrote that blog and talking about my love for Canada. It's really my love for Canadian music because I don't really like hockey that much. I definitely don't like curling. I think lacrosse is a big thing up there. I could care less about lacrosse.
Canadian
Um,
football is the field's too fucking long.
and they're running at the line of scrimmage
There's
like
too
all
many
the
people
time. I'm
moving.
like, what the hell's going on here? But actually, I did watch the CFL when I was a kid, so
Did you
I
really?
have I have deep roots. Well, I think remember ESPN was looking for
Oh, yeah.
anything to play at the time. It's like Canadian football and Australian rules football. So I could get into all the different footballs. But yeah, I knew, I used to know all the team names. Edmonton Eskimos. I believe they've probably changed their name.
Yeah, most
Um,
likely. Most likely. Yeah, I remember watching a couple games of Canadian football and thinking, I don't understand what's going on here. There's too many people moving. The ball hasn't even snapped
no,
yet.
and we always knew, and it's funny, my favorite, like even this past year, I guess some team, maybe even a playoff game, won on a rouge, which is if you kick a field goal and because the goalpost is at the front of it's on the goal line, like it used
Okay,
to be in the
yeah,
NFL.
yeah, yeah.
So I think you kick, I forget, I don't, but basically you kick it, and if the other team doesn't return it out of the end zone, it's a rouge, which is 1 point. So some team won a game on the last play, I kind of missed field goal because the other
Really?
team, yeah. So something. Obviously, I need to beef up on my CFL rules because
Yeah. Although on the other hand, I went this whole NFL season. I still don't fucking understand the kickoff rules.
I
So
know.
like the NFL is changing rules all the time on me too. So I can't keep up with anything.
Yeah, the landing zone and the rouge. I just like to say rouge. It's a
Me
very
too. I like it.
French
Rouge.
word.
So this is it, man. This is your Great White North episode. This
It is.
this is the one you've been waiting for since like episode 3, season 1. I think you were talking about we got to do an episode about Canada. And I think it was mainly because you seem to love Canadian bands.
I know, and I am quite sure that it has a decent amount to do with the algorithms on either YouTube Music or Spotify, because they'll say, "Oh, this is a Canadian band he's listening to. Let's find some more Canadian bands." But it doesn't mean I have to like them. And I go and I listen and I'm like, huh, I like this band too. And I've even had bands that I originally didn't like Wild Rivers, because they seemed a little too pop or whatever for me. And then I went back and I'm like, fuck, like that acoustic album that I shared with you,
Mm-hmm.
Songs to Break Up To, I think is what it's called. Something like
Yeah.
that. Fantastic album. They came out with a new one, having a harder time catching on to it, but I still count them as a band that I dig. And I didn't realize it until I started researching, but my love for Canada goes back to pre-college, like April Wine, uh,
Ah, yeah.
good old, I mean, I always, and it's funny because I guess they don't always advertise where a band's from. I mean, unless they're from someplace odd. I mean, because there's plenty of European bands and whatever. But yeah, April Wine was a big one. Aldo, I don't even know if you remember this guy, Aldo Nova. He had one
I
big hit.
do.
Yeah, that one big hit was a
Although
monster hit.
it
Nothing
was
else.
huge, yeah. And I was never sure if it was that was the name of a band or a person.
I know, I'm not sure either, but
And for that
and
matter, same with
then
the April Wine. It could,
yeah,
it might just be a
that's true. It could
girl.
be. It could be. And then a shout out to my sister. My sister's favorite band all through high school was Loverboy. And I had no idea that they were Canadian until I started researching this episode.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I did a little bit of research and kind of in different categories of pop culture. And I realized that in terms of contemporary music, the only Canadian bands I know are ones that you've suggested. I don't, whatever my algorithm is, it never throws me or very rarely throws me Canadian bands. And like there's a few you've recommended over the last year or so that I really like, but I hadn't heard of them before you recommended them. Because when I went through the list, I was like, oh, Rush. Yeah, sure. Everybody knows Rush. I kind of like Rush. I like them better now than I did when they were popular. To me, it was all just kind of like old school bands from college or earlier that some of them I didn't even realize were Canadian. The one I did, maybe my all-time favorite band, but certainly my all-time favorite Canadian band is The Band.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I love them, and I've been talking about songs from the band. I think they had one American on that in that band. Everybody else was from Canada, and they play Americana music. They're like one of the seminal Americana bands playing old time, or not old time, but like, what's the word? Kind of folk rock,
Yeah.
American-based music better than almost any American band ever did.
So is it really Americana if they're doing it? Is it not Canadiana?
Right, right. If I don't, I think Rob King mentioned that at one point. Maybe it's Canadiana, Canadiana. I don't know.
And then my last of the old, not old, but college bands that I listened to, I know that this one will connect with you, but Honeymoon Suite, because I had that T-shirt that someone freaking stole from me that just said in real big font, "Bad Attitude," and then it had their tour dates on the back. I must have gone to a concert because I don't know where the hell I got it, but I don't remember. I don't remember going to the show, but it was they were one of my favorites, and they were a little popular for me, so I'm a little surprised. Although I think they got made fun of a lot, but they were seen as one of the lighter pop bands back then.
Yeah,
They
they were
were
more
all about
pop, I
pop.
would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking through that list. From pre-college, there was Men Without Hats, and I can remember, and whatever the song was that was like their one big hit was just kind of a gimmicky song. But they actually had one good album. I remember listening to that album and liking it. I haven't listened to it in ages. College-wise, and soon after college, there was a band called Cowboy Junkies,
Hmm.
which I went to Mississippi Nights to see them when they were touring under their first album. And I believe it was the first concert I ever went to with my wife, with Dawn, like back long before we were married. When we just started dating, I think I took her to see Cowboy Junkies. That was really cool. And then there was Bare Naked Ladies, who are one of the most fun bands I think that you can listen to. And I had forgotten that they're Canadian, but they're kind of famously a Canadian band too.
Yeah, and I was going to bring them up as well. I mean, they're very famous. I saw the tour. Shoot, I should know the name of the album, but their most popular album. I got tickets, went with my then wife, and it was easily the funnest concert I've ever been to. They were just,
Yeah.
they were a laid back bunch of guys. They were talking about being on tour for so long, and they were having a beard growing contest, and it was just they were goofy and entertaining as hell. It was one of the best concerts I've ever seen.
I just looked it up because I couldn't remember. But one of the things I thought was really cool was that they put out at least one kids album,
Hmm.
a complete album of kids music that I think was called Snack Time. And I'm looking it up right now. It came out in 2008. Yeah, so the boys were like 2 years old, and she would have been four, no, six. So it was kind of perfect timing. And it's one of those where you're like, oh, this is a really cool band, and they put out a really cool album. I think we wanted to go see them live. They were playing in Chicago somewhere, and I think we missed the show. But they're exactly the kind of band I think that could do their stuff and be kind of a famous touring band, and then kick out a kids album that didn't sound really any different than their regular album, and not miss a beat. And then go back and tour and play for adults and have a good time. But I always like that band.
I want to do a couple more recent bands, and then we should transition into your areas of expertise, which is everything that I don't do, which is movies and TV. I can hang with you on the comedy front though. But this episode, one of the reasons I'm most excited is there's been a song I've been waiting to unveil to you either on a playlist or something else. It's one of my favorites. It's called Autumn Leaves. It's by a guy named, or it's a band called NQ Arbuckle. Very underappreciated, which I'll get to in a little bit. It's a great, great song. He's Canadian. He's one of my favorites. Get into his sound in a little bit. But the other bands that I have, I've talked a little bit about, and it's a pretty wide spectrum. Rural Alberta Advantage, about the most Canadian name you could have. Um, their lead singer's got a little bit higher of a voice than I'm usually into, but I love they're just straight rock, and their drummer drives their songs as much as any drummer I'm aware of. I love their music. Very different sound than something like NQ Arbuckle, who's much more Canadiana. The Glorious Sons, who are starting to make a name for themselves. They have a great song called Sawed Off Shotgun and some other stuff. The Arkells, a little poppy for me. They do a song called Leather Jacket, which is very good. It has one of the best endings. It's like calling somebody up on a payphone. It's like, who the hell uses a payphone anymore? Or something like that. It's a great ending to a song. And then I already talked about Wild Rivers. It's not a duet, it's three people, but a guy and a lead singer, female lead singer and a male lead singer who play nicely off each other. A lot of songs about breaking up, which is why I like them. Bluestones, straight ahead rock and roll, and then Current Swell. I'm starting to get into a little bit more. I have a reference to them a little bit further in the episode. So that's some of my musical references. Just want to get those on there if folks are interested in checking out any of these bands from Canada, like I am.
Yeah, that's and that kind of underscores what I just said. Of that list you gave, I know about the Bluestones because you talked about them last episode.
Yep.
I've heard of the Arkells, and I'm pretty sure it's because you put an Arkell song on a playlist somewhere. And the other guys, never heard of them. I take that back. Rural Alberta Advantage, I have. I really like that band, but that was another one I didn't know about until you talked about them. But everybody else, I don't know. So I've now got at least 3 or 4 more albums I got to listen to so I can get caught up and be ready for my Canada test. So when I started, as we often do when we come up with a theme for the podcast, I just throw stuff into Google and see what comes up. And I was a little surprised that I was as light as I was on the music side of stuff that I liked. But the thing that really occurred to me when I started thinking seriously about doing this episode was how famous Canada is for their comedy and how much we've imported into the United States that we basically treat as our own, as institutions of American comedy. And the biggest one to me is Saturday Night Live, which is an American comedy institution, but was basically created by a Canadian named Lorne Michaels. And there's a great article in the New Yorker just about a month ago or so, which I think I finished like 2 days ago, because that's usually how far behind I am on reading that magazine. But it talked about him. It's kind of the standard biography, how he created SNL and what came up through American comedy and blah, blah, blah. But it made me think about how many Canadians were on that show and made it as funny as it was, and how when they started it was that way, because Dan Aykroyd was in the original cast and he's Canadian. There were I think Lorraine Newman might be Canadian. I can't remember, but certainly it had this Lorne Michaels sensibility, and he came up. He originally started in Canada and Canadian TV, and he was a stand-up, and he worked as a comedy team with another guy. But SNL has affected comedy in America for the last, they're celebrating 50, right? Isn't that what I think? 50 years is this season.
It's crazy that it's 50 years old.
I know. But at the same time, when SNL first came out, when I was a kid, I can remember the other thing you would watch or stay up to watch was SCTV, which was made in Canada, filmed in Canada, as Canadian as you could possibly get. And the stars of that series were John Candy, Eugene Levy, who's still huge in American comedy. They just wrapped up that Schitt's Creek, which was a huge hit. I think he created with his kid. Dave Thomas, Catherine O'Hara, who is also the Schitt's Creek. I think she's still works with Eugene Levy now. But that was another one of those shows that got copied and was kind of cloned and redone in different forms in the United States. And those two shows, I think, are just so important to American comedy and American television.
Yeah, if you just look at that list of people you talked about, Martin Short, Mike Myers, Dan Aykroyd, Phil Hartman, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, Norm Macdonald, John Candy. I mean, it's just a slugger's row. I mean, it's just fantastic group of comedians. And they're Canadian, and they're Canada.
And we are Canada. But but they continued, and there are some shows that I'm not haven't even talked about because I didn't really watch them. But one, back when we were in college, Kids in the Hall came out,
yep.
And that's another one that everybody in the United States ended up copying. There's a million versions or shows that are basically just ripoffs of Kids in the Hall. But those guys were hilarious. And they were so willing to push the envelope. They would do a sketch that, they would follow it to its ridiculous conclusion. And it seemed like they didn't really care if you laughed, but man, when they got you to laugh, you didn't stop laughing. But those guys are around in entertainment now. You see them all over the place. Dave Foley is a great example of that. But that was Dave Foley, Scott Thompson, Bruce McCulloch, Mark McKinney, Kevin McDonald. They've been in a million movies, a million TV shows since then. But then they rebooted Kids in the Hall not all that long ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I think they did a couple more seasons of it on Netflix or something like that. And it was just as funny. They were older, and they made fun of that a little bit, but they're definitely part of that lineage of Canadian comedians and humorists, I think.
And I don't know if this is a fair advantage because I don't have other shows to compare it to, but I think one of the things that tied like SCTV and Kids in the Hall together was that it was a little more cutting edge than what you would usually see in American TV. Like you said, it pushed the envelope, not in any sort of vulgar way or anything, just in a weird sense of humor. They were just a little off. And
yeah.
As you said, they now have shows that are copying it. So they had the effect of impacting our culture. But yeah, I don't want to go too far down this because it was an American show, but one of my favorite shows, and I've talked about it early on in our podcast, involved Dave Foley and Phil Hartman, which was News Radio. Just a fantastic show. Those two really played off each other so well in that show.
Yeah, what it turned out to is they could do that kind of real off-kilter sketch comedy, but it turns out they were really, really good actors too. And you could put them into a more traditional kind of sitcom scenario, and they would just shine over a lot of the other people that were there.
And I haven't watched these. I've read reviews and I want to watch them, but as far as pushing the envelope and being a little off kilter, some of the TV shows out of Canada, like the first two you listed, Letterkenny and Shoresy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Letterkenny and Shoresy are relatively recent shows, and I think they're on Hulu. I can't remember. Yeah, they're definitely on Hulu, and I don't remember how they came to me, what algorithm recommended them, or whether it was an individual that told me about them. But Shoresy is a spinoff of Letterkenny. They were both created by a guy named Jared Keeso, who is a Canadian, and they are just, again, they are off-kilter sitcoms, basically. Letterkenny was just about this tiny little town in English-speaking Canada, and it was about these. There were people they called Hicks. They had, and I can't remember the way they categorized everybody, but there were a bunch of kind of druggy guys, and then there were the drunk redneck types, and they all lived in this town, and they all kind of stayed away from each other, but then they would interact. And this guy Keeso, I think, is just a really, really funny guy. And I watched the first episode, the first 5 minutes, where these two hockey players show up, and they're trying to, they're friends with Jared Keeso's character, Wayne. They're friends with his sister, and they come to pick her up, and they're just two lunkhead, dumb jock types. And Jared Keeso and two of his buddies are sitting on the front yard drinking beers, and they just completely tear down these guys. They've ripped them up and down. It's the funniest thing you've ever seen. The names, the way that they're making fun of them. Just I watched they're short episodes, so they're only like 25 minutes each. I think I watched 5 in a row after I watched that opening scene because I thought it was so funny. And it was funny enough that they spun off another character played by Jerry Kiso in Letterkenny, who was a hockey player who you never saw his face. They turned that into this show Shoresy, which is about this minor league hockey team in the same area. And it's really well written. It's really kind of low budget. There's not a lot of sets, and it's just it's all I can say is it's worth watching. It's really funny. There's a new season of Shoresy coming out apparently in spring of 2025. Letterkenny is done, but if it came back, I would watch it tomorrow. I just think it's the funniest thing in the world.
Sort of segue into sports and movies. When you think of Canada, you often think of hockey. And you listed a movie that I don't know, Goon.
I'm surprised you haven't seen Goon, actually.
I'm gonna have to check it out though, because just the description on the script makes me want to see it.
That movie, I believe it was written by a Canadian named Jay Baruchel. So Jay Baruchel's he's a real tall, skinny, dorky looking guy. He's been in a bunch of comedies. He's one of those guys who you'd know him as soon as you saw his face. But he plays a very minor character in this movie that stars Sean William Scott from the American Pie movies. He's the kind of the asshole dude. Sean William Scott plays an American from the Boston area who can't even skate, but ends up signing with a Canadian minor league team because he fights like an animal. He's like a maniac. And it's all about him taking the train and going up to out in the middle of nowhere, Canada, playing for some single A team up there, and how he creates this huge following because he gets in tons of fights. But it is absolutely hilarious. And they did a sequel that I think is called Goon 2, which is really not worth watching. But the first one is great. It's so funny. Lee Schreiber is in it. He plays like an enforcer who played in the NHL but got kicked out because he beat the hell out of somebody on the ice or something. And now he's back with his old team in this Canadian minor league scenario. And Sean William Scott has to face off against him at a certain point in the playoffs. And anyway, it's a really good movie. It's basically set all in Canada. And I think Lee Schreiber is a Canadian actor as well. I know Jay Baruchel is from Canada. And it's just, it's definitely worthwhile. I'm sure it's streaming somewhere, and you got to watch that movie.
I'm on it. That one sounds great. So any other Canadian movies before I segue to one other Canadian piece, and then we'll move on to some other segments?
The only one that I would say that it's Canadian in the sense that it's set in Canada, and there's a lot of conversation about it being in Canada and talking about the United States kind of in negative terms, New York City in particular. But that's Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That's a kind of I wouldn't call it an underground classic. It stars Michael Cera and I can't think of her name. There's an actress. She's been in a million things since then. It's the director of that movie, and I think he wrote it, is Edgar Wright, who's British, but he sets everything in Canada. And it's Mary Elizabeth Winstead is her name. She plays Ramona Flowers. This movie is based upon a graphic novel, which is also pretty well known and has been. In fact, I think they eventually turned it into an animated series as well, like an adult animated series. But that one it feels very Canadian. They're very proud of Canada when you hear the characters talk about basically anything, particularly in relation to the United States. But that's another one that I think is a great movie. I watch that a couple times a year probably.
I gotta start watching some more TV and movies. I don't know what I'm doing with my life.
I know, man. You do all this, work and spend time with your family. I don't know what the hell you're thinking.
Yeah, I gotta get my priorities straight, especially with Canada. So I do know what the episode spotlight's going to be for this one. It's going to be a clip of the funniest moments by Joey Votto. So Joey Votto was the Reds' longtime first baseman, one of the best players in Cincinnati Reds baseball history. He was Canadian, and he actually got to end his career with one season playing for the Toronto Blue Jays. He is one amazing baseball player, and two, he's freaking hilarious. Like, he would interact with fans all the time in just really funny ways. Like, if someone was being an asshole, he'd find a way to shut him up in a really funny way. So he's one of my favorite people. And there's a clip out there it's like 6 minutes long of Joey Votto's funniest moments. So that's going to make it up on our website, which has some lots of links back to all the stuff we're talking about. And I will say this, and I'll close it out on the music front until we get to our other segments. Tom and I are just, fellow travelers. I'm just going to use that word. I don't even know if either of us has been to Canada. So we're doing our best to characterize my love for Canada. And I'm sure it's just skimming the surface. So we apologize to Canada. Don't hold this against us because there's a good chance I'm going to need to get there sometime in the next 4 years.
I
But
think we should put out a call to our listeners to give us other recommendations. Email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com. Message us where you can on Facebook. Let us know what we missed because there's a lot out there and we need to bone up, I think.
we do. And I know what we did miss, and it's in my blog for the week of February 3rd, which is the Tragically Hip, which is easily, I think, the most loved, one of the most popular Canadian bands ever, and they just never managed to cross the border. I mean, I think people know their name, but I've read article after article of people, Americans mostly, saying how much they want to like the Tragically Hip, but they were so Canadian, like what's his name? Gordie. Oh, I got Gordie Howe stuck in my name. He's a hockey
Yeah.
player. It wasn't that?
Yeah, I don't think that was him.
No, unless he was, no, it's not. I'm not gonna make any jokes. I'll have to go to the website. But fantastic songwriting, deep into Canadian history and culture, and I don't think it always conveyed. And I don't think they never sold out. They were Canadian through and through. And when the lead singer passed away, tragically from, I think, cancer, the entire nation mourned him and celebrated the band. They're putting out some new stuff now, some compilations. So it's definitely worth checking them out. It's not a band, despite my efforts, that I've been able to get into.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I read your article and I didn't realize just how important they were to Canada, to the people of Canada, and the response that came after he passed away surprised me. I had no idea that was the case because I'm like you. I know who they are, but I'm not 100% sure if you played a song, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's Tragically Hip.
And I'm totally ruined my chance with Canada because I forgot the Tragically Hip's lead singer's name, but it's Gord Downie. It's not Gordie Howe. I'm sorry.
But I mean, it was a 50-50 chance it was Gordy something. So
Yeah, it was Gord something. All right. Thank you for a nice roundup of Canadian culture that Tom and I are aware of. That takes us to our next segment, which is Unknown Unknowns.
Because I love the unknown. I love the unknown.
Unknown Unknowns is our opportunity to make recommendations of pop culture that we don't think you know about.
It's my turn to let us in on an underappreciated artist. As it happens, he is from Canada. So NQ Arbuckle, who I mentioned just a few minutes ago, is the name of the band, I believe, because the NQ stands for Neville Quinlan, who's the lead singer. Tom will probably know this better than me because I haven't listened to this gentleman too much, but at least one reviewer compared his voice to Richard Buckner after a few too many years on the rodeo circuit. So I'm guessing that means he's a little bit of a rougher version of Richard Buckner. And I think I can agree with that if I knew what Richard Buckner's voice sounded like. NQ Arbuckle has 6 albums out. Their latest is from 2023 called Love Songs for the Long Game. I'm going to highlight that one a little bit. My favorite on that album, sorry, is most of their stuff we'll go with Americana for lack of knowing what Canadiana is, but story songs, love songs, breakup songs. In fact, one of my favorite songs on that most recent album is a song called Dress That You Met Me In. And it doesn't sound like he'd be able to pull it off, but he pulls off a great rhyme with my eyes so full of depression, but you're wearing the dress you met me in. But somehow he makes that rhyme.
Nice. That's good.
His delivery. Yeah. Sounds good. And he also ending the song with, 5 or more repeats of, that's one of my favorite conventions, is when the song ends with the same line over and over again, just sort of driving home the point. But on this song, it's "You're such a bad liar." It's just, he's a great writer. 2009, he did a duet with Carolyn Mark, who is the other Korn sister to Nico Case. She's got a great voice. So you have her beautiful voice and his rough voice playing off each other throughout the album. It's a really fantastic listen. And my favorite all-time song, I said it earlier, is "Autumn Leaves." And it's a guy who's longing for a lost love. And I think he's sort of stalking her, but not too much. So
A little
it
light
doesn't cross
stalking.
yeah. And then lastly, because I love that Canada also refers back to America, one of my other favorite songs, or sorry, one of my other favorite lyrics of his is, "It's hard to be a good man listening to the Drive-By Truckers." I think that's it. Check out NQ Arbuckle, wholly underappreciated band, fantastic lead singer, great songwriter. It's not for everyone, but I think it's for a lot more people that are listening to it right now.
Cool. I have not yet listened to NQ Arbuckle, and once I do, I will get back to you on the Richard Buckner comparison
Yep.
and let you know what I think.
And I apologize. I have a post facto, like, immediately. I meant to highlight on that latest album, they also do a really cool cover of Nirvana's "All Apologies," which you got me thinking, because there was a song or a story like last week. Oh, shoot. Who's the drummer for Nirvana? He's now in the Foo Fighters. Super famous. Maybe not the drummer, maybe he's a guitarist.
Dave Grohl.
Yeah, Dave Grohl. So Dave Grohl's daughter sang Nirvana reunited, of course, without Kurt Cobain, and his daughter sang "All Apologies," and she just crushed it. So
Really?
that song was on my mind, and then I'm listening to this for the episode, and they do a nice cover as well. So "All Apologies" seems to be forefront in the last couple of weeks.
Yes. Is that All Apologies cover by NQ Arbuckle? Did you say that's the most recent album that is on?
Yeah, that's on the most recent album, and I think it
Okay.
shows some nice range, because sometimes when you get that really distinctive voice and that's somewhat downbeat music, you can, get lost in the song starting to sound alike. But I think that was a nice change of pace.
Well, and this seems like a great unknown to put out there for our listeners. I don't remember if you said this, but if you look on YouTube Music, they have 456 followers.
Yeah.
I did not look on Spotify, but that's the kind of following that doesn't seem fair for a lot of these bands and musicians that we recommend.
I agree.
Speaking of recommendations, every episode, Chris and I make a recommendation from a specific year. This season, we're making recommendations from the 1990s. And as this is episode 8 of our season 6, we are recommending pop culture from 1998. What do you got?
I'm going to go first, and I'm going to be brief because I already talked about it and I gave away my story. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's not like we have a script or anything like that I could follow. But my choice for the Canadian episode is the Canadian band Bare Naked Ladies and their 1998 hit album Stunt. And that is the album they were touring on that I saw. It's full of catchy, fun songs. They help me get past my not liking popular bands, just because I think it's because they don't take themselves seriously. So it doesn't seem to have the same annoyance factor that I usually have with bands like this, but or overly popular bands. I shouldn't say bands like this, but this album, they just go out there and do it. And there's a flippancy to some of it that's fun, and it's just it's great songwriting. It's catchy. It songs like "1 Year," or I forget the name of that super popular song. "It's been 1 year."
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. No, it's not. But it's a great song. I'll look up the title as Tom's doing his, but I'm sure just about all of our listeners, it's an obvious choice. But when I saw that one on there, I had no option but to include Stunt for the Canadian episode.
Yeah, that's a band I never have seen live, and they just they did always sound like they were having so much fun in their studio albums. I can't imagine what a live show would be like.
And the name it 1 week. It's not been 1 year. It's been 1 week since you looked.
Yeah, since
There
you
Well, I gotta mumble because if I sing too much longer, we will have no listeners.
My recommendation from 1998 is not Canadian in any way at all, I don't think. But I looked up films that came out in 1998, and one of my all-time favorites was the movie Rounders, which was directed by John Dahl and starred Matt Damon and Edward Norton. They were both famous then, but not as famous as they are now. And I just think it is such a fun movie about the world of underground poker. It introduced me, and I think a lot of people, to Texas Hold'em. And I read reviews and I've read a couple articles about the movie, kind of long after the film came out, saying that it's one of the few films that really captured and clearly explained what Texas Hold'em was like in terms of what you had to do and how, both the logistics of playing and also the strategies behind it. But the underlying story is basically about Matt Damon, who's this card prodigy who's going to law school, who used to be a rounder, which is a slang for a guy who kind of made money as a low-level gambler, card player. But it was him and his buddy Edward Norton, who was just kind of a piece of shit. He's just the guy who cheated everybody, and he was the guy who was always getting in trouble. And Matt Damon was the guy who was always getting him out of trouble. So this is about them reconnecting, and then Edward Norton putting them in a position where they've got to go on this all-night tear playing poker, trying to make money to play gangsters. It's a great movie. The poker scenes are really tense and really interesting, which I think is kind of tough to pull off. But the John Turturro is in it, who is a classic character actor. He plays a guy named Joey Knish, who's supposed to be the voice of reason. He's the career rounder. He's the guy he literally pays his mortgage by playing cards. And he's the guy who's always trying to keep Matt Damon away from Edward Norton. And the funniest thing I saw on background is because I thought Joey Knish was kind of a funny name. But apparently he's based on a real New York City card player named Joey Bagels. And I'm like, geez, man, why did you use that name? That's even funnier than Joey Knish. But probably the most memorable character is John Malkovich as Teddy KGB, who is a Russian guy. He's a Russian who runs this poker room that's underground, that's all kinds of illegal gambling. And he has, in that movie, the worst Russian accent you've ever heard in your life. There is nobody who listens to him talk thinks that he's actually from Russia. It actually pulls you out of the film. So initially when I saw it, I hated it because I was just like, oh, that's just terrible. But if you watch the movie a couple times, it just becomes funnier and funnier to listen to him with this just awful, awful version of a Russian accent. But anyway, it's a great movie. It came out in 1998, and despite the lack of connections to Canada, I couldn't help but recommend it for this episode.
That's a great choice. It's actually a movie that I've seen.
Yeah, that's one that, again, it came out in 98, so we were both out of St. Louis at that point. I don't think I saw it in the theater. I think I rented it, but I remember renting it and watching it a couple times before I returned it. I thought it was so much fun.
And that will take us to our next segment, which is Staff Picks.
Random, just around the corner from you.
Staff Picks is our opportunity to try to recommend something that is either brand new or coming out soon, or maybe just came out recently. It is our effort to kind of recreate walking into the record store and seeing the display where the employees wanted to point out new records that were coming out, or going into the bookstore and seeing the shelves where they're like, hey, these are the new books by great authors kind of stuff. So I'm going to go first with my staff pick, which is a film starring Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt that is coming out on Netflix on March 14th. If all goes well according to our production schedule, this should be dropping on March 10th. So by the end of this week, you can see the film The Electric State. It is based on a graphic novel created, written, and drawn by a guy named Simon Stalenhag. I love this book. If you get a chance to find the graphic novel, The Electric State, he did that, and then he actually ended up creating a sequel to it. It's this weird story about a girl going through this dystopian world. I think it's set on the west coast of the United States after some kind of horrible cataclysm. But his drawing is very hyper realistic. So the illustrations look like they are photographs to a great extent, but they juxtapose nature and then these crazy giant robots or weird spaceships or things that are like crashed in the ground near, a redwood tree or things along those lines. So the story is, there's very little dialogue, there's very little text in the graphic novel. It's mainly these beautiful illustrations as these characters kind of go through this world. I have no idea what the film is going to look like, but I'm really excited to see it, because if they do a good job, it's really kind of a cool thing to try to move over from the graphic novel form. So the movie is directed by the Russo brothers, who are famous for a couple of the Avengers films and all kinds of other cool sci-fi-ish stuff. So I think that there's a lot of potential for this one. I'll come back and report on a post facto in a couple weeks and let you know. But I'm recommending it only because I love the graphic novel. I think it's such a weird and cool vibe to the whole thing that if they can capture that on film, I think it'll be really worth watching.
That sounds cool. I'm going to check that out as well. Man, I got a long list of shit I said I'm going to check out. I got
You just say shit sometimes.
I do. So my choice is also Canadian. Might be shocked, but Canadian music. It's one of the bands I listed previously called Current Swell. They have, I guess they're gaining in popularity. They have, how many followers they have on YouTube? They got almost 2,000 followers. So not underappreciated, but not overly appreciated. My favorite song by them is a song called Woman in White. Their latest single, just released this past week, is called 10 Feet Tall. It's a good, catchy, upbeat song. I like the lead singer's voice. I have a hard time characterizing what they sound like, because this one's just a different sound for them, and I like the direction they're going in. They're definitely not pigeonholed in a particular sound. One of their albums was called New Folk, which is the one that Woman in White is from. But even then, I thought it's tough to lump them into or put them into a particular box. But this is quickly one of my favorite songs, and I'd encourage folks to check it out. So 10 Feet Tall by Current Swell. I also like that band name.
Me too. I do too. Our final segment is playlist picks. Every episode, Chris and I each pick a song to add to our season 6 playlist, which you can find streaming on Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, and Apple Music. What we try to do is we try to pick a song that coincides with the theme of the episode. And for my playlist pick this week, I am picking a song by Canadian band Blue Rodeo from their album Casino, which came out in 1990. The song is Till I Am Myself Again. I used to listen to this song or this album a lot. I really liked Blue Rodeo for a period of time, and then I kind of just stopped listening to them. And going back and re-listening to the album and the song Till I Am Myself Again before this episode, I came to the conclusion that Blue Rodeo is kind of the poor man's Jayhawks. I think if you like their kind of music, it's better done by Jayhawks. However, I really do like this song, and I almost wore this album out for a period of time. I really enjoyed it. I think I was listening to it right towards the end of law school, which was the end of the time I was living in St. Louis with you and Joe.
Yeah, that one almost, it must have been the algorithm, but it showed up not too long ago, a couple months ago, and I liked it, added it to my favorite list. It's a great song, and it harkened me back to how much you used to play this stuff.
Yeah.
So
I like
I'm
it.
sure you put this on a playlist or two of ours.
Yes.
Great choice. I like the comparison too. And I do like the Jayhawks. Sorry, Canada. I do like the Jayhawks. Maybe a little better than Blue Rodeo. All right. So I'm making one last attempt to fully connect with our Canadian listeners. As hard as I've tried and as much as I've failed to fully get into the Tragically Hip, I am going with what I think is their most popular song. I could be wrong, but it's the one that I know. It's Ahead by a Century from their 1996 album, Trouble at the Hen House by the Tragically Hip. And I put on my choice, I Owe It to Canada to do this song. So
This is
they can nail it. I mean, their songs are catchy, and this one's above and beyond catchy. It's just an uplifting song. I've been listening to it over and over again, not to kiss up to Canada, just because I hadn't listened to it in a while. But this is one that I definitely love, and it makes me want to like some of their other stuff more. And we'll see. I mean, I'll try to dig in. But yeah, Ahead by a Century. So 2 Canadian songs added to our playlist, which is only fitting for our big episode on Canada. Feeling a little let down. I mean, now what the hell do I have to look forward to anymore?
well, I'm a little embarrassed because you are really kissing Canada's ass right now. That's all I have to say.
You know, I have a question though. Is it really kissing their ass if no one's listening? I mean, because
Well, this may get to them though. You never know.
You
You
know,
may never-
yeah. I was trying to think if I knew anyone in Canada. I do know someone in Canada. I'm going to send it to him.
All right, it's going to spread like wildfire once you do. So we're going to get an
just
invitation.
like the rest of our episodes have.
We're going to get an invitation for at the very least dual citizenship. I think once they hear this episode.
I think that's a possibility. I think we should get like the Order of Canada or something.
That famous award they give out all the time, the Order of Canada.
Is that even an award?
No,
Sorry,
it's
Canada.
not. I'm sure it's not. Deduct 2 Canada points.
we should have been keeping score. I might have ended up in the negative on this one.
It's possible. I didn't do you any favors, that I can tell you.
Well,
We're gonna do. You know what's gonna happen? We're just gonna sneak over the border. That's
true. We'll do it. You pack up all the episodes except for this one. I'll bring this one,
Okay.
and I'll extend it to them when we're going across the border. And I'm like, he's the guy that said Blue Rodeo is a poor man's version of the Jayhawks.
And then
That wasn't me.
escorted out at gunpoint. Take you and your Jayhawks bullshit out of here.
Well, if we just wait a little bit, Canada's going to be the 51st state. You know,
Sure.
if all goes according to plan.
Of course, yeah. I don't see any way that'll hit a snag at all. Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois. You can reach us by email at thirdsongin@gmail.com. You can listen to all of our episodes wherever you stream your podcasts: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube Music. When you do, please follow us, rate us, write a review on any platform you listen to us. Please give us all of your stars.
We want stars.
We want
And
stars.
if you refuse to give us your stars, at least go to our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. You can listen to all of our episodes directly from the website. You can click on a link on the front page to take you directly to our blogs. Tom and I put one out every week. We take turns. If you love his stuff, he's putting one out soon. If you love my stuff, thank you. Appreciate it. I also get links to information on the special guests that we have on our show. Our most recent guest was Brent James, lead singer of Righteous Hillbillies. You can see some of his tour dates coming up and other information about him and his band.
We have a Facebook page. You can find us by searching Third Song In, and you can subscribe to our blog on Substack. You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening.
Does seem like everybody. His name Gordy. Is that what you're gonna say?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Never mind.
Then you thought better of it.
I did.
We continue to undermine our efforts to woo Canada. We're trying to woo Canada, and we're not doing it.
I feel like we're pushing them away.
We are. You can also get. You can do stuff.
You can do all kinds of stuff. Whatever the fuck you want. It's a fucking webpage.
There's a
Jesus
direct link
Christ.
There's a direct link to Canada.
Motherfucker, that guy's from Canada.